Can hear me okay? Okay, thanks. And thanks, Rob and Porrick. Um, so I'm going to share my screen in a moment, and really what I'm going to talk about for about the first about 40 minutes at least is about what we call with grappling with wicked problems and other harms and complex harms. This is part of a local leadership program that I lead, which already about 150 professionals in Ireland, whether they're community-based, agency-based, have worked through this program, grappling with from about 50 different organizations, grappling with a number of sort of complex issues, whether in their locations, in their area of work, etc. So anyway, I'm going to share my slide, and then I mentioned, or I put in a thing asking people to try and define a problem, and in about 15 words, if possible, to look at a problem. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as I'll explain. Okay, so let's hopefully this bit works. Okay. Now again, a thumbs up there from someone if I can see. Rob, if you can see that. Porrick.
All good, Johnny.
Okay, because
Yeah,
I can't see anyone now. So okay. Okay, so firstly, essentially what we're saying here, the basic premise of the program is that the wicked problems that face us today, they tend to be caused by such complex forces that their course cannot be changed by isolated interventions. They require multiple stakeholders working together over many years with a shared commitment to common results, so that the resources and authority necessary to bring about the needed change can be mobilized and successfully applied. Now, what this statement asks us to do is to take a long view of the issues that we face, that there is no quick fix solutions to the most complex issues that we face. It also requires us to acknowledge that we have to work together across different agencies, partnerships at local level, etc. That we have to come up with a shared commitment to common results, which often sounds easier said than done, because a lot of these issues, they involve, sometimes complex values, value differences. So it requires us to come together and negotiate these differences so that we can come up with a common approach. And in doing that, that helps us to mobilize and present a case really for resources, for support at policy level. Now, this slide will be familiar with some of you. It's by the this is a painting, Storm on the Sea of Galilee, by the 17th century Dutch Golden Age painter Rembrandt. And we use this as a motif for the program. It describes a time when people went to sea and they were literally in the laps of the gods, as it is said, where they could be overcome by overwhelming chaos any minute. They'd have very limited control, that things could change any minute. There could be calm and then the storm. So it was arbitrary, and they were never sure whether they would eventually make it home. I'm going to use that, and I'm going to come back to this later on in the program, because what we often this sort of chaos is sometimes, particularly when we look at climate change, it's actually growing. But what we are essentially what this program is putting forward is the idea that the social sciences can be mobilized to support policy approaches to addressing complex issues. And that is essentially what we're at. Now, just to give you a quick overview, I'm firstly going to talk about wicked problems and then complex harms. I'm then going to go into how do we consider the size and the shape of the problem. So what size problems can we take on, and who can determine that? And then going to talk a little bit about the local leadership program and how it operates in terms of creating a deliberative space, because sometimes you do have to negotiate different values, different approaches, different opinions, different perspectives, and that needs to be done in a respectful and safe way. And you're then going to talk about the different stages of problem solving and then present a sort of program heuristic, which is really just a learning device that the program follows across the definition of problems, the importance of evidence in terms of understanding problems and delivering responses or solutions, and then the sort of technical approaches in terms of developing theories of change, the importance and challenges of monitoring and evaluation, and the whole way in which we mobilize groups in terms of developing collective impact. So the term wicked, and this is the sort of seminal text here on the left-hand side that was written by two authors in the mid 1970s. Now the term wicked problems is used regularly nowadays to communicate usually a policy situation that is very complex. And in trying to be more specific, if we go back to the first use of the term by these two US academics, Horst Rittel and Melvin Webster, writing in the early 1970s, their paper, Dilemmas in a General Theory of Planning, is a landmark contribution to thinking about complex problems. Of course, Rittel and Weber are writing this paper, which is actually dealing with urban planning. And they were writing this at a time in the mid 1970s after decades of relative stability in the US, marked by significant faith in science, engineering, and the professions, the ability, the purported ability to diagnose and fix any problem, whether it was disease or putting a man on the moon. Given sufficient patience with the scientific process and incremental development of tools to fix the problems, the idea was, or the sense was, that the most complicated problems could be fixed. However, in the late 1960s and 70s, things were much more turbulent. Citizens were a lot less trustful of authorities, to being about real change. Things like fairness, values like fairness, equality were considered just as important as results. And so there was, in a sense, there was a challenge to the sort of the claims of the sciences and the engineering and technical sciences. Our second reference on the right is to bring us into the sort of the right thinking space is Malcolm Sparrow, a professor from Harvard Kennedy School who, as an ex-police officer from the London Metropolitan Police, uses some of the thinking about wicked problems to practically think about how to resolve very complex real problems. And we'll come back to Professor Sparrow. But for now, I want to just focus in on wicked problems. So this, as I say, is the seminal text, Dilemmas in a General Theory of Planning. And what's the one important point I would make at this point is that when we talk about problems, we're not talking about pathology. We're just talking about the nature of the problem itself, the state of things as they are, and how we try and figure a way through that problem. First, Riddle makes a very important distinction, separating tame problems from wicked problems. So tame problems, such as on a chessboard, where there's a clear sense of the challenge of what can be done. It's very definable. There's a logical step. It's a very bounded and closed system. The folk, in when you're dealing, for example, if we're trying to build a railroad or a motorway across a desert, it is essentially an engineering or scientific feat or task. The problem is clear. The tools are available. It's not saying that it's not complicated or complex, but we know what the end looks like. We know when it will be complete. And generally, the focus is on efficiency. It's just improving our processes. And it is clear as well what success means. With wicked problems, however, there's a disagreement about the problem and its causes. It lacks precise definition. It can be random and chaotic. It's difficult to contain. A bad result is bad, and as I'll explain in a moment. The focus is on trying to understand the problem and its different aspects. And success is elusive because, firstly, the problem is difficult, and it's also hard to agree what success would look like. And also, it does require time and patience. And as one of the things about dealing with wicked problems is the importance of not knowing too early which type of solution to apply, because particularly with such complex issues, they can have unintended negative consequences. So by intervening without thinking fully, you can actually make the problem worse. So here you see complex tasks, but would you say they are tame or wicked? So what makes a problem wicked? Um, Rattel and Weber identified 10 categories, but there is some duplication. There's no need to remember these or take any notes. And we will send out a PDF of the presentation, but it's just providing a backdrop to help your thinking later on. Hopefully, some of it will resonate, and it may bring a problem to mind. And if so, you can share it later on. So I'm going to go through these sort of definitions of a wicked problem one by one. So there's 10 of them. Firstly, that there's no definitive formulation of a wicked problem. Okay, here, this problem is mainly a Dublin problem, where you have seagulls stealing people's fish and chips when they're out on a Sunday stroll. Now, there are many dimensions to this. Firstly, it's bad branding for the local chipper. If as soon as customers leave the shop, they are attacked. The town hall may have public health issues or street rubbish or potential litigation issues from accidents on the footpath. There might be criminal justice issues to do with animal cruelty, people attacking seagulls, for example. Local parents might be angry due to the closing off of park space. There may be a tourist impact where holidaymakers, instead of staying around Dublin, will go off to Kerry or Cork and places like that. Seagulls may have a case that they are being overfed and that it's causing seagull obesity. So essentially, what we're saying is that there is no one monopoly on what the problem is. There are multiple perspectives. COVID, for example, is another example of these multiple perspectives. Wicked problems have no stopping rule, and here's the sort of the issue that at one time it just was one of these problems that never stopped giving, Brexit. Sometimes it was like a sort of an unstoppable train that it was hard to get in front of. But this wasn't, say, for example, a situation like Brexit. It wasn't helped because there was a unitary definition of the problem or what it would look like when it was originally introduced. And it was only when it began to unravel that the multiple aspects of what we were dealing with became clear. Solutions to wicked problems are not true or false, but good or bad. So, for example, here's a 2-minute sort of evidence-based thought to reducing the crime problem in Ireland. Put all men in jail, you'd get a 90% reduction. Put all men in jail at night, you'd get an 80% reduction. Put all men in jail for the weekend, you'd get a 60% reduction. Make men subject to curfew and supervised placement, and you'd get a 50% reduction. I'm sure many people might support this. So here we can see that this would be unacceptable because political values and science would clash, and politics will trump evidence-based policy. No pun intended there. And also, there's no immediate and no ultimate test of a solution to a wicked problem. It has a sort of a spillover effect because it's happening in an open system, not a scientific laboratory. We can't say today or over time whether our solution has worked or made things worse until all of the ripples, both positive and negative, have worked their way through. Also, every solution to a wicked problem is a one-shot operation because there are limited opportunities to learn by trial and error. Every attempt counts significantly. Once you start, you're in, and there's lots of dependencies. It's like it's strong as the weakest link. And also, wicked problems don't have an innumerable set of potential solutions. So it's not like you can just pick a number of programs off the shelf. And even if we look back at our railway our railroad example, um, everything looked fine, but even topographical challenges can be overcome by mapping and engineering. um, with a small range of tried and tested tools. But what happens when there are land disputes or there are arguments about whether a train line is needed at all, or the budget is withdrawn, leaving it half finished in the middle of nowhere? So the point here is that where contexts are messy and ever changing, off the peg solutions or programs become even more brittle, in the sense that we don't have a tool sometimes to address these problems. Every wicked problem has a unique character. This graphic here is some work that colleagues and myself are doing in criminal networks. I'm looking at criminal networks in Ireland, and here using sort of police intelligence and other data, it identifies four different networks in a particular location. So when you start looking into this small area, for example, you can see that it's quite unique. In every location, it's different. And we've done a number of studies like this, with each one showing that they are that they're quite unique, and that has an implication in terms of interventions, whether it's law enforcement interventions, preventative interventions, or other types of interventions. Every wicked problem can be considered to be a symptom of another problem that is upriver. So a challenge here, of course, is that the higher the level of a problem's formulation, the broader and more general it becomes, and the more difficult it becomes to do something about it. So we can end up in too many discussions about how far upstream we go looking for solutions to problems which are here and now. And it can often lead to sort of agency paralysis. So this is our discussion about where do we draw the line around a problem so that it's big enough to matter, but small enough or neat enough to make an impact with the resources available. And this is really the art or craft of addressing such problems. And I'm going to come back to this shortly. The existence of a discrepancy representing a wicked problem can be explained in a number of ways, and the choice of explanation determines the nature of the problem's resolution. So essentially, this means it's about the analysis of the problem, and the causes of the problem are really important because they will inform your solution. So it is important to tease out the different perspectives on why are we in this situation in the first place? Where did this problem come from? Because once you come to such a conclusion or a belief, that will inform the direction that you then take. So it highlights the importance of understanding, or at least agreeing on a sort of a common diagnosis on the problem, even if you don't understand the complete problem. Um, and perceptions of discrepancy vary. So the problem is often not just the problem, but the way that we've dealt with the problem. So if you look at this slide here, so on the left-hand side, we have a problem-centered service design. My son is a nightmare at home. He's breaking up our marriage. He's out of control, using drugs, dealing drugs, and threatening to kill himself. Now, often the approach to that is to that sort of problem or multiple problems is to take a program-centered service approach. So, for example, it might involve parenting issues, marriage guidance, school attendance issues, drug treatment, youth justice approaches, mental health approaches, and all of these have a lot of transaction costs. So, and sometimes we can lose sight of the original problem because we're taking this program-centered approach. And again, this is something we'll come back to. And the social planner has no right to be wrong. So if you're working in a laboratory, you can make mistakes and they don't have any consequences. But out in the real world, where responses have to be made, um, tame problems have a fairly clear linear approach. We know where we're going with them. But wicked problems require us often to adapt, to change course, to reflect, to rethink. And so it's a lot more messy. And really all you can do is try and keep your eye on the North Star. You know where you want to go, but getting there is going to be a little bit more tricky. Now I want to turn to Malcolm Sparrow and the character of harms, operational challenges in control. So Sparrow identifies three different types of harms that I want to touch on. Firstly, invisible harms, harms with conscious opposition or opponents, and harms in equilibrium. So more generally, conventional science can sort of ignore or occlude patterns and trends because it relies on a limited range of instruments which have equally limited detection. So one example here, just to explain this, is in the London in the 1850s, in the Golden Mile, there was a cholera epidemic, and patients were being treated on the basis that there was a miasma or cloud of infection that was the cause, and the solution was clean bed linen, etc. However, lay scientists Whitehead and Snow had a hunch that it was to do with water supply. Um, and they were right and discovered a network of infected pipes leading back to only certain water suppliers. So in a sense, sometimes the sciences are limited, and it does require us responses to these sort of complex problems. Does require us to sometimes take innovative approaches, and particularly, and this is the point that Sparrow was making, particularly when you're dealing with his hidden problems. Invisible harms, available data may only show very partial or biased views of the problem. And such problems might only be disclosed when the lens of magnification is increased to reveal the sort of elusive textured middle layers, as my colleague Sean Redmond puts it. In a number of areas, for example, in drugs misuse, in relation to domestic abuse, sexual and gender-based violence, and in relation to other serious crime, the official statistics don't tell the full picture. In fact, data from the UK suggests that only 1 in any 4 crimes are ever actually reported, but don't necessarily make up the official crime figure. And if you include other crimes, such as, say, misdemeanors like bicycle theft, you're talking about 1 in 11 crimes. So these are invisible harms that can sometimes be the most significant issues from a community perspective, but they're often hidden from view and hidden from policy. And then Sparrow talks about conscious opposition. And that is where you have harms or people, for example, who deliberately circumvent controls and they respond intelligently to defeat control intervention. So that there's an intelligence behind the opposition or behind the harm. And so some of these opponents are technically very sophisticated and clever. A colleague of ours, Niamh Hourigan, did a study on Limerick around criminality, and a lot of it to do with drug dealing in Limerick City. And essentially what you had was a contested sovereignty where large areas of the city was being controlled by specific networks or criminal networks. And so any attempts, for example, to improve the area by local people or by residents were resisted. And so it was very, very difficult from a law enforcement perspective to engage with local areas because there was a conscious opposition trying to assert control over the area and pushing back against any attempt to improve it, to improve it for residents and others in the community. The third one that I want to mention is harms in equilibrium. And these are harms that behave like a ball bearing sitting at the bottom of a depression. Give it a little nudge and it merely settles back to its original position. The forces of gravitation, coupled with the shape of the terrain, pull it back to where it was. So in response to a perturbation, the ball bearing, sorry, the ball the ball bearing may wobble around for a while at the bottom of its hole, but without a substantial shove, it will eventually settle again in precisely the same position. And I'm sure we're all very conscious of this, that sometimes some of these problems that we're engaging with or grappling with, they seem endemic and almost impossible to shift without a really sustained effort over time. Now, the next issue that when we are doing the local leadership program is we have to then discuss what size and shape of problem can we take on, and again we come back to Sparrow, and I'll talk about some of these. So Sparrow identifies 5 different levels of problem or harm. So at level 5, you would have a broad category, for example, health, poverty, the economy, crime, immigration, and you'd have different sort of responses to this. You have sort of, you might, in response, for example, to issues around children, you might have referendums at a very high level. You might have the establishment of departments, specific governmental departments focused on this particular area. So these are very broad. They're responses that we would all support, but they're very broad and they miss a lot of the detail. Level 4 problems might be sort of specific harms that are elevated to a crisis. So, for example, an issue in Ireland would be overcrowding in hospitals, the issue of the lack of housing, homelessness, where people are out in the streets. And so you have these harms are elevated to crisis level, and they are very public and politically visible, almost appear impossible for government to control. They generate embarrassment, and they are urgent and require concerted action. And then we'll come back to level 3 problems. Level 2 problems might be something where problems or patterns, they can be dealt with by sort of informal groupings of practitioners who are motivated. So they're not necessarily big enough to require total organizational innovation. They can be around tailor-made solutions, where sometimes, often, what a manager will just do will allow some people to just take on a problem because they want to address it. So, for example, it could be in the opening of youth club at times to divert young people from public order spikes. So, setting up a breakfast club for elderly residents. So, it doesn't mean a huge organizational shift, but it does require some degree of innovation. And then level 1 problems are where, say, individuals might present with social welfare needs or benefit inquiries, or complaints process. So it's one specific case or incident, and it can be generally dealt with routine processes. Now, for the sort of higher level problems, higher level 4 and 5, you would generally agitate politically. For level 2 and level 1 problems, you would sort of act to intervene and address the problem, either a small group of committed people or a small routine change in an organization. So if we just go through these a little bit more, so level 5, if we're talking about children, so here you have sort of bundles of sort of disparate objects all lumped together under a common title, usually at a national or international level. But they will miss important sort of textural elements. They're all very progressive developments. We'd all champion them, but they coexist with wildly different outcomes for children and young people. And to what extent can the problem be explained by demographics or by structural issues? Or can it be explained by what happens beneath this broader level? Then level 4 problems would be sort of crisis elevation, where organizations become embarrassed and driven into action, where all resources are channeled to dealing with the problem. Like this one, for example, is around road safety, um, and sort of organizations in a way are on the back foot. And again, you're dealing with an open system, so sometimes it's very difficult to get hold of the whole problem. And it's important to try and sort of localize the problem, make it more doable in a manner that's meaningful and where lessons can be drawn. Um, or for example, it could be sort of changing level 2. Now we're talking about where a change can just be accommodated by a minor adaptation or innovation. So change opening hours in an organization where staff come together to sort of solve a problem, which can have big sort of important solutions for people. Or here's another one where with drinking and driving, issues around alcohol and driving, that arranged lifts for people to come to be able to get home safely. And then lowest level problems would be sort of individual cases, an inquiry around a benefit, a housing request, a citizens' rights request, etc. And then the focus of the local leadership program is on anything in between. So it's about sort of picking battles that are big enough to matter, but small enough to win. And so, as Sparrow puts it, if you bite off too much, the chances are that you'll choke. But if you bite off too little, then nobody much will really care or probably even notice. So it's about looking at what you're capable of, but it's also not about just dealing with the symptoms of the bigger sort of the problem that has started upriver. So it's about deciding what is within your capacity, within your resources, etc. And again, we'll touch on this. So I want to just talk a little bit now about the local leadership program. So essentially, the objectives of it are to increase practitioner familiarity with practical tools for wicked problem description, definition, and the development of solutions, to enhance competence in evidence-informed approaches to making better decisions, to improve cross-agency, disciplinary, integrated, and collaborative working in terms of dealing with complexity. And this is a very important part of the program in that it brings people together across agencies, organizations, at community level. And even in that process of coming together and trying to determine the sort of the problem, that in itself can be a really positive process. And ultimately then to produce co-designed implementable proposals for strategies and practices that address wicked problems. So this is a sort of a descriptor of the program, where we start with a problem that's worthy of attention. It's sort of a hypothetical. We then pick it apart and define the problem in a sort of a safe space. We generate stress test ideas, and then we come up with ideas or proposals that are where ideas are presented as conceptually informed by wicked problem or complex problem analysis. They are strategic in line with other strategic strategies. They are logistical, they're operational, and they're ultimately realistic. So problem definition, it's a discrete function. And with complicated problems, it needs a lot of time to be done properly. As Rittel said, the problem is often we jump to solutions too quickly, and we have to hold that space, which can be very difficult in our experience. Wicked problems have multiple perspectives. They morph, they adapt, they require contingencies, as well as long-term outcomes. And if you see the distance in the graphic between problem definition, description, and the idea generation, and the presentation of ideas. So that is all very specifically built into the program. And in the early part of the program, in block one of the program, we ask people and agencies, to just bring their intellectual capacity, to leave their agencies and organizations aside for the moment, and just to look at the problem as an expert observer and look at the problem in its natural state, not as it relates to your own sort of responsibilities. However, towards the end, you need to think about your agency space, for example, because we need you then to step back into your day-to-day roles, but as a corporate sort of problem solver. In a sense, you're going, well, okay, that solution, it looks good, but it won't work in my agency for this reason, or it has to be adapted, in some way. And this whole process, of course, is a deliberative process. Jürgen Habermas is arguably the world's leading philosopher and public intellectual. And the essence of his work is that people can only learn and truly understand things if they are active participants in the creation of knowledge. Essentially, knowledge is created by a process, he says, of argumentation, in which participants agree to listen to each other as well as putting forward their own views in an honest attempt to come to the best understanding of what to do about complex problems. Reg Revens, the late Revens, would be seen as the father of sort of action learning. And he stressed that all true learning, L in the equation, is a combination of building on received knowledge, which he called program knowledge, hence the P in the equation, and the insight that is developed as people address complex problems. And he called this sort of questioning insight, the QI in the equation, questioning insight. And he was dismissive of so-called knowledge in the form of untested claims or knowledge that has no practical use. For Revens, the best learning comes through groups of people who are committed to each other as they seek solutions to pressing problems for which there is no known answer, but which they have to solve. And he calls such people comrades in adversity. And in such a situation, the problem is always shaped by a wider context. Yet, change also depends on individuals having to confront their own ignorance and habits of thought and practice. And this is taken up here, where it's important to overcome sort of self-referential or habitual thinking. And it also, following on from Revens, um, the trainee here reminds us that the point of training or events such as the local leadership program is to bring about change that matters to people in communities, or at least to show how it might be done. As Karl Marx famously said, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Now, WICET in the local leadership program generally is around significant social problems and issues: criminal activity, community safety, drug and substance misuse, poor educational achievement, poor health outcomes, impaired community efficacy, social isolation, lack of community supports, inadequate social provision. We've also dealt with issues of, ethnic differences, ethnic abuse, and all of these issues that we've sort of looked at. They have multiple and interacting layers. They morph, they manifest in new ways, and are likely to continue. There's no obvious solutions or tests of success, and success can be contested between different stakeholders. Measurement, which I'll come back to, can be very problematic. The problems can persist despite significant state, voluntary, and community sector interventions. Previous interventions, in fact, may have deepened the harms experienced by citizens. And often agencies and bodies are not mobilized to optimize the resources or work together effectively. So extra resources are unlikely to improve matters. In general, we have seen there's a need for new ways of thinking and practicing, and more effective ways to collaborate up, down, and across systems. So the stages of problem solving We start with a sort of nominating the potential problem, defining it precisely, determining how to measure impact, and then developing solutions or interventions. This is the sort of heuristic for the program. It's divided over 3 blocks generally, which starts with problem definition. So, wicked problems require creative, collaborative, and collective approaches to problem solving. The processes are results of collective solving and the emergent of ideas or solutions rather than predetermined. Good problem definition is an essential prerequisite to developing realistic and practical responses. And also, wicked problems occur within a dynamic socio-economic context and operational system. In terms of looking at solutions, an evidence-informed approach to a problem solving must inform judgment and improve decision making. A theory of change, which I'll touch on, can help to which is just like a plan, can help to clarify and explain the link between actions and intended outcomes. And a theory of change is also of little use if it is unintelligible to others. And then finally, in terms of presenting, effective solutions must be intrinsically capable of being enacted. Addressing issues effectively means differentiating between things over which we have control and influence, and those which in effect we cannot control or influence. And without monitoring and evaluation and review, there can be no sustained solution to problems. Communicating ideas effectively to a wide range of audience is essential to collaborative problem solving in sort of making a case or making a pitch. So for the first block, a lot of the focus is on this problem definition. As Einstein puts it, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I'd spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. Once I had the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. And this can be a really frustrating part of the process in our experience, because people think they have the solution when they walk into the room and they want to rush to that solution. Sparrow uses the analogy of a knot, and the way he says it is that if you look at the way an adult responds to a knot or the untying of a knot relative to a child, give it a knotted massive string to an adult who has developed all of the relevant cognitive skills and maybe had some experience too, and watch how they behave. Notice how they hold the whole object up to the light and look at it this way, then that way. Turn it around and around, examining it diligently from all sides, careful all the time not to pull or tug or to make matters worse, until they break into an understanding of the structure of the thing itself. And as the structure of the knot becomes clearer, so the components or stages of a plan begins to form in their minds. So maybe if I can loosen this strand first, it will loosen that one, and in turn that will free up the main one, at which point I'll need to pass this tangled mess here through the opening, etc., and so on. So if they understood the structure of the knot correctly and fashioned a plan, the knot eventually falls apart and is no more. By contrast, give the same knot to a child who has yet to develop this particular set of cognitive skills and observe their behavior. Witness their frustration as they tug and pull and generally make matters worse. Note the relative lack of attention to observation and discernment of the nature of the thing or the particularities of its structure. Note the alacrity with which the child jumps into action, applying crude methods that usually fail. So that is part of the process, taking time with the problem. What does this aspect of the problem look like? These are a series of stages that we go through. What are its consequences for people in communities? In what way is it wicked? What is its size and its shape? How does it sustain itself? How does it work? Who knows most about it? Who do we need to talk to? And what behaviors need to change? We're going to come back to this probably, but this is ultimately what we're trying to achieve is a problem statement. And this is what I asked you to look at earlier on, that when you define a problem in this way, it can become bounded and manageable. and we'll come back to that. These are some of the problem statements that we grappled with. Um, you know, organizations' lack of a flexibility, stifling creativity, children and young people being unsupported to participate fully in education, ending drug dealing in a particular location, children living in homeless hubs who were experiencing significant development delays as a consequence of their physicality of their living space, particularly in their early years from 0 to 5. Rapid staff turnover undermining the quality of service. So these are some of the issues we looked at. The second part of the block is about of the program is about being evidence informed. And here we take a very broad approach to evidence. It is about the integration of experience or practice wisdom, judgment, and expertise with the best available external evidence from systematic research. If we go back to Rembrandt, so what we are trying to do is we might not have big solutions to this problem, but we can start to generate some ideas. So over time, in relation to the storm on the sea and the chaos, etc., science has developed ways of measuring distance, ways of measuring weather forecasting, charts, etc., to aid in navigation. If a boat does begin to sink, bulkheads have been developed so that the boat might not go down immediately. There will be a time for people to get into life craft. You've professional trained life crews, etc. And although the chaos and the storm isn't necessarily changing, and as I said, with climate change, it's getting worse. Um, these developments can help sort of load the dice a little bit and make things a little bit easier, or sort of load the dice a little bit more in favor. And this is where social sciences are being mobilized in support of these policy challenges. We use this Solomon's wisdom, where he has to decide over which is the mother of a child, and what would they bring to this. So we look at evidence in terms of defining the problem, consultation, monitoring, evaluation, practice wisdom, policy guidelines, theory, evaluations, research, etc. So taking a very broad look at it. And then in terms of defining the final thoughts on the problem, is it one, has it got a natural size and shape? Is it one object, one natural whole? Has our analysis captured all aspects of the problem? Um, is it sufficiently bounded in terms of discretion? Is what we want to do legally permissible? Are there tools within our ownership or that can be acquired? And in our partnership, is our partnership approach? Are there too many transactions involved, or is it efficient? Are we happy to have responsibility for solving the problem, or take some responsibility for serving it? And this is what we call the crush test. Would you feel overwhelmed by its size? Can it be slimmed down? Can the geographical area be reduced? What's in our control? What supports do we need? What are the externalities? And then in block 3, we are asking people to sort of to think of innovative ideas. And sometimes, as Sparrow says, when organizations start to mobilize around specific harms rather than around functions or processes or programs, they engage in a very different type of organizational behavior. And it is not business as usual. Whoever chooses to tackle a knot often has to invent the whole methodology for themselves, provide all the energy and all the ideas, and enlist all the necessary partners. And it's also important, to be open to good ideas when we find them, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, as the saying goes. Um, and then finally, I want to just touch on some basic elements. A theory of change is useful as a way of getting a sense of whether it's called theory of change, system change. There are 4 simple questions that need to be answered when tackling complex problems or issues. And when everything gets confused or overcomplicated, it's worth going back to those basic questions. Where are you starting from? Where are you going? How will you get there? And what will tell you that you've arrived? Some call it a roadmap. Another important part of this then is about the assumptions that are informing your approach. And these need to be informed by evidence. So we use sort of an if-then. So if, for example, here's a tutoring example, if we invest time and money, then we can provide tutoring 3 hours a week for one school year to 50 children. If we do that, then those struggling can be tutored. If they can be tutored, they will then learn to improve their skills. If they learn and improve their skills, they will get better results. If they get better results, they'll move to the next grade level on time. So by breaking things down in that way, it enables you to question your own assumptions and to mobilize evidence in support of those assumptions. Because if things are if things go wrong, basically, and this is not a linear process, as I'll show you in a moment. It is when you start developing your plan using, for example, a logic model such as this, you have your problem statement, your characteristics, etc. You need to, it's a continuous learning process. And if things are going wrong, well, then maybe some of your assumptions, your initial assumptions were wrong in the first place. And maybe you need to go back and think through that. So a theory of change is not linear or rigid. Initially, it represents the best thinking about what to do. And the thinking will often change in the realities of practice, and they will need to be altered accordingly. Major changes, however, would cast doubt on the thoroughness of the initial thinking. And so that's why the initial focus on the problem is really important. And although it can be frustrating to spend time in that problem space, it's very valuable later on when you start trying to do things and you go, hang on a sec, we did think that through, and this is why we are taking this course of action. And then finally, just to touch on a couple of things, and this is around the importance of monitoring and evaluation. And maybe we can talk more about this because I think this is a really challenging area. And sometimes we use what we call contribution analysis when it's not practical to design a randomized control trial or a big study, which costs a lot of money to look at performance. Contribution analysis can provide credible assessments of cause and effect. So you're looking at trying to verify the theory of change that the program is based on and paying attention to other factors that may influence the outcomes. And this can provide reasonable evidence about the contribution being made by the program. So think about sort of piece of the pie, essentially. Rather than predicting and measuring the extent of if a program can be considered to have caused the effect or impact, contribution considers typically smaller changes that occur for service use that are planned, that can be plausibly associated with a program of intervention and that fit in with an overall theory of change. So particularly groups, we try not to burden groups, especially at the initial stage of a possible intervention, with high expectations about rigorous forms of evaluation. It's better that they can build in simple data collection systems and know how they'll be able to answer simple questions like, are we getting there? And what difference have we made? Or what have we achieved? That they won't be the sole factor involved. So it's about the contribution they are making to improved outcomes for people in communities. So these are just, I'm gonna finish here and maybe I'm just gonna finish in a second and maybe come back to some of this because I don't want to sort of overwhelm people, but I do think the issue around monitoring is really important. And the main message I would say around monitoring and evaluation is to use existing systems and access existing information if possible, and where these are adequate. Create something simple if needed, but keep it simple. And this is something I will send out to people. It's a little bit difficult, but it provides a sort of a quick overview of sort of commonplace ways in which outcomes can be captured and information collected that is useful for monitoring and evaluation purposes. And groups can think about, if you look at the middle, good relations, employability, citizenship, personal development, which of any of these might be of value to your proposed initiative? And it is important to agree all of these. And then finally, I want to just say a couple of things about context in a couple of minutes, and I'll let you go. The Bronfenbrenner's social ecological model can be helpful when thinking about where the problem resides within a system. It can, of course, be on all levels, but the second box on the right, it outlines sort of typical types of interventions. In other words, broadly, what would you be doing to address the problem or issue? Obviously, the issues can be at different levels, but interventions are stronger when they align with one another. For example, changes at the services level can enable better work with individuals. More accessible information from services can help with work that is focusing on changing or reinforcing values and attitudes at the level of the individual. So that can be a useful tool. And then it's it's the importance of collective. As I say, these types of problems they span different agencies and organizations, so they required collective action. But collective impact works differently. As these writers put it, the process and results of collective impact are emergent rather than predetermined. The necessary resources and innovations are often already there, but they've not yet been recognized. Learning is a sort of a continuous process, and adoption happens simultaneously among many different organizations. So, in other words, collective impact is not merely a new process that supports the same social sector solutions, but an entirely different model of social progress. And here is the second final slide. So the 5 conditions of collective impact, and I think this is a really important figure, is about developing a common agenda, like a shared vision for change, and a common understanding of the problem, and joint approach through agreed actions, shared measurement, collecting data and measuring results consistently. And that means using what data sources you have, and sometimes inventing some that you may need to use, and but ones that are shared amongst different across all of the sort of partners. Um, Participant activities must be differentiated but still being coordinated. So sometimes in multi-agency approaches, every agency doesn't need to be there all the time. And sometimes that can be a problem because there's people are going to meetings repeatedly and the same meetings over and over again, meeting the same people. Whereas really, when you focus on a problem and you analyze the problem, it's about saying, hang on, this should be led by a particular group or agency. When our agency are required to participate or to engage, we will do so, but we know what's going on and we're part of the same overall process. So that's more what's important. And then a key to that, of course, is continuous communication, the building up of trust, um, assuring mutual objectives, a common motivation, and then, of course, backbone support. Um, you know, it can't be just about individuals going off and doing their own thing. It requires commitment and responsibility, a specific set of skills, and backbone in terms of an organization behind the process. And then my final slide I want to touch on is where we are going next, and I'm happy to talk about this. Is the a sort of a part of the youth justice strategy in Ireland. We're looking at this concept called no wrong door, which in a way is trying to do the types of things we are doing in the local leadership program, and sort of providing services in a more seamless way to people. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to stop sharing for now, if I can figure out how.
Thanks, Johnny.
Thanks. Now, I know that was a lot to take in, but as I say, I'll send out the PDF, and any thoughts, people, this is sort of a process, a learning process for us as well. The program has been going for a few years now, but we've done it in a way that we do a constant feedback process at the end of every program. So it's an ongoing learning process, and so any thoughts as well are also welcome.
So if it's okay with you, Johnny, and maybe you might that we might everyone go and grab a quick cup of coffee, and we'll put people into 4 breakout rooms. And maybe 20 minutes to kind of discuss, and myself, Padraig, Kate and Joanne are going to lead one of those breakout rooms each. And we'll be back here in 20 minutes in with maybe some questions for Johnny. But if Johnny, you want to give any guidance before we go into the breakout rooms?
Yeah, well, what I would suggest to keep it simple is just to use the sort of the what, so what next formula. So what, in a sense, like what's jumping out at you from the presentation? So what, why is it significant? Why is it jumping out at you? And what next? How can this sort of approach be improved? How can it work for you in your organization? Are there things you could add to it, etc.? So that's what next. So even if it's just keep it that simple, because you won't want a huge amount of time. I think that would be great.
Okay, thank you. So what I'll do is I will break the breakout rooms, and if everyone wants to grab a quick cup of coffee and be back in the breakout rooms in 5 minutes, so that's at 11:40 UTC time. Yeah, so I'll do the breakout rooms now, and we'll see you all there in less than 5 minutes. Okay, while I work out how to do this. I'll stop recording.